Thank you everyone for having me here this morning. I really appreciate the invitation from New Canaan Cares and from East School. And if you have any questions while I'm presenting today, please just shout them out. You don't have to wait until the end. If there's something that I'm saying that maybe isn't clear or you want me to expand upon, please go ahead and just let me know in the moment. So New Canaan Cares asked me to come in and talk to you a little bit about childhood anxiety, and specifically also what are some strategies that you can use to help regulate your children. Can I go to the next slide? So, I think it's fair to say that the impact that COVID has had on all of our children and even on us as parents is an ongoing thing. Even though, right now here we are, almost 3 years into the pandemic, and we're thankfully in person without masks on and able to see each other's faces. But we know that the impact that COVID has had on all of us is something that we're going to continue to see for years to come. One of the things that we knew even before the pandemic that was going on is that the rates of anxiety and depression in children were actually going up, even before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, we started to see record numbers of children and families seeking mental health services due to really significant symptoms of anxiety. So the good thing is that, if we think about the impact of COVID from an exposure model, we know that people who are closer to an event, a potentially traumatic event, people who are closer tend to have a greater degree of impact or more symptoms. And sort of the further out that you are from the event, the less likely you are to develop those symptoms. Now, COVID is something that happened to all of us, but we all experienced COVID in very different ways, depending on whether we lost a loved one, if a child had a parent that got sick and maybe had some severe symptoms, if a child got sick and had severe symptoms. They're going to experience and sort of make meaning of what happened to their family in a very different way than a child who maybe has not experienced any kind of loss from COVID. There's also some individual variables that we want to think about. So to what degree was the child maybe already sort of temperamentally anxious even before COVID began? So was this a child that maybe had some separation anxiety, had some difficulties with changes in their routine, and then having something like COVID come around and have everyone's routine, upended, would mean that that child is more at risk for developing more significant anxiety than children who were, we all know those children that seem to be sort of very easy to transition and very flexible, temperamentally very easygoing, and they're more likely to sort of be able to, roll with the changes a little bit more. And so when we think about even now, how our children are reacting to COVID or the changes after COVID, it's normal to expect some changes, right? Things like emotional changes, like maybe more tearfulness, or maybe for some of your children, when they return to school the first day after masks were no longer mandatory. I'm sure there were some of you that had children that weren't quite sure whether they wanted to take the mask off. And is it okay to take it off? And at what point can I take it off here, but should I wear it there? And is this person standing too close to me? And I know that even as adults, we've had those moments where should I put it on? Should I take it off? This feels a little uncomfortable. I don't even know how to be in public anymore. I have probably lost all my social graces in the last 2 years. I don't even know how to interact. Children have gone through the same things, right? So you might also expect some cognitive changes, things like having a little bit more difficulties concentrating, thinking, daydreaming, behavioral changes like difficulties coming to school, or maybe more tearfulness at home or at school. So when we think about anxiety in young children, elementary age children, in some ways can look a lot like anxiety in middle schoolers, high schoolers, and adults, in the sense that, they can tell you that like their brain just seems to, be going, and they can't stop worrying about things. They're worried about things that may or may not happen. But in younger children, they actually tend to present in a slightly different way. So you end up with more somatic symptoms. So things like, I have a tummy ache, I have a headache. In some children even, like they get so anxious, they start to like, scratch at themselves, nail biting. So it seems to present in sort of more physical ways. And here you are as a parent, you're taking them to the pediatrician, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with their tummy or their headaches. Doesn't mean that they don't actually feel those things. Their stomach actually does hurt. Their head actually does hurt. It just means that there is no sort of biological underpinning behind that pain. They also have more sleep and eating difficulties. So things like, a child who used to sleep well is now having difficulties sleeping, maybe falling asleep, because again, their brain is sort of going for a while and they have a hard time sort of resting their body before they can go to sleep. They might wake up in the middle of the night and try to get into your bed, or they, take out a book because they just can't go back to sleep. You might also see that they're waking up earlier. Or if they're having a significant amount of insomnia during the day, they might be waking up later because they're so tired. They're waking up and they're incredibly fatigued because, I don't know about you, but I don't function very well without a lot of sleep. So if they're having a lot of difficulties with sleep, that morning routine that maybe you guys used to have down might be a lot more difficult because they're just tired. You also have more eating difficulties. So you might see that all of a sudden they seem to be eating almost to comfort themselves, so overeating. Or you might see that they don't want to eat anymore. They seem to not have a lot of appetite. And what you'll notice is either they're not gaining weight the way that you would expect them to gain weight because they're growing, they're getting taller, you would expect them to gain weight, but they're either not gaining weight or they're actually starting to lose weight. And that's when you want to consult with your pediatrician. A lot more irritable, temper tantrums, a lot of tearfulness. So again, maybe your happy-go-lucky child is now crying because they spilled their glass of water at the dinner table. So little things that feel like, why is my child overreacting? Or like, this isn't that big of a deal. Like, why is this suddenly such a big deal? It could be anxiety. It's a level of irritability that's just really difficult to control. They also tend to develop a lot more sort of irrational fears. So maybe if you're, and along with irrational fears is sort of this loss of developmental milestones. So especially for very young children, right? If you're talking about a kindergartner or first grader, and even younger, if they had already been sleeping through the night and not wetting the bed, they might start wetting the bed again. They might have resolved this fear of the dark, and all of a sudden they're asking for like 3-4 night lights on at night. Or they might be asking you to fall asleep with them because they're having a hard time falling asleep, or they're coming into your room in the middle of the night because they're scared. They're scared of something they can't quite put some words to it. They also might have a hard time separating from you. So it could be that they have a hard time separating in the morning when it's time to come to school. It might be difficult for them to separate from you as they're going to a birthday party or their after-school activities if you're driving them there. And you might have the, my tummy hurts, I don't know that I can go to soccer practice today. And again, part of it is they feel safest when they're with you. And so the way in which they calm themselves, they regulate themselves, is by having you next to them. And so that's why it's very common for kids with anxiety to have difficulty separating from their caregivers. That being said, our kids are incredibly resilient. Right? So can people just shout out what they think about when they think of the word resilience? What do you think that looks like? How do we raise a resilient child?
Being able to overcome challenges.
Being able to overcome challenges. Mm-hmm.
Bouncing back.
Bouncing back.
Coping well. Coping well.
Coping well. Okay, yeah. So essentially, for resilience, it's the ability to successfully bounce back, like as someone had mentioned, in the face of adversity while maintaining psychological well-being. So it's not just a matter of being able to overcome a challenge, but it's actually being able to maintain their psychological well-being when doing it, as opposed to having to sort of, white knuckle through it, and they get through it, but they're really not feeling good at the end of it. And yeah, that ability to just sort of roll with changes, roll with the punches, being able to, take things in stride. So what do you think is the most common factor that is exhibited through research, that is exhibited by children who are showing a great deal of resilience? What do they all have in common? Confidence, okay. So there's a lot of things that they have in common, but the single most predictive factor for a child to exhibit resilience is having a good relationship with an adult, having a solid, nurturing relationship with an adult. It could be you. And the more nurturing relationships they have, the better they do. So it could be you, it could be a teacher, it could be the social worker, it could be a mentor, it could be a coach. As long as children have at least one person that they believe, truly believe in your bones, like very, instinctively believe that there is someone in this world that really cares about you. It doesn't matter whether you got an A, it doesn't matter whether you scored that goal, who just accepts you for who you are and really cares about what happens to you. Those are the children that are more likely to exhibit resilience. So the more that we can think about really surrounding our kids with those nurturing adult relationships, the better they will do. So, in the interest of time, since we had some technology issues earlier today, instead of playing a video for you, I'll actually tell you about Dan Siegels, who is part of the UCLA School of Psychiatry. And he talks about everyone's brain, not just their child's brain, as, you can think of it almost like using your hand, right? So if you were to think about your brain or your child's brain, the wrist is the spinal cord and the brainstem, and your thumb is your limbic system. All of these things, these three structures that I just talked about, they help to regulate your level of arousal, how nervous you get, it regulates your emotions. This is also what we call like the primitive brain, right? Or have people heard of like the lizard brain, right? This is sort of pure emotion and instinct. And then over it, we have structures like the prefrontal cortex in particular. Now the prefrontal cortex, this part in the front, is the part that actually helps you make logical decisions, helps you sort of calm down, learn from things. So, when you hear in schools talking about like, are you ready to learn, is essentially, is your prefrontal cortex online? Now, what happens in all of us is that when we're faced with something really scary, or something pushes an emotional button for us, or we become dysregulated, right? We're not in a calm state. Dr. Siegel talks about it as we flip our lid. So that means that your prefrontal cortex is no longer online. The only thing that's acting right now in your brain is this entire area that's just pure emotions and instinct. This is where, like, your brain on instinct is trying to decide, do I fight, do I flee, do I freeze? So in moments when we are particularly aroused or emotionally triggered, or for our children with a lot of anxiety, they tend to flip their lids quite frequently and sort of stay up here for longer periods of time. Because anxiety really is a fear that you're not safe. And for young children, it's particularly more difficult because they don't necessarily have all the vocabulary to tell you why they don't feel safe. And sometimes they don't even have the vocabulary to be able to tell themselves why they don't feel safe. So all you know as a little kid is, I don't feel good, I don't feel safe, and I have no clue why. I mean, think about how disconcerting that is, right? To not be able to make sense of your own experience, let alone when everyone's saying, but what's wrong, and you can't give words to it either, right? So the reason why I am telling you about the hand model of the brain is when we think about strategies, when you have, and not just an anxious child, but when you have a child who is dysregulated, who is not in a calm state, think about where your child's brain is, right? Are they sort of in lizard brain? Have they flipped their lid? Or are they in wizard brain, right? Has their prefrontal cortex come back online, and can they think? Can they make calm decisions? And so it's important when you want to help regulate your child, when you want to support them, to think about where is their brain in that moment. The other thing to think about is where is our brain in that moment? Because there are certain things that our kids do that can really make it difficult for us to remain in a calm state. So, for example, if I'm already running late, I have an appointment that I need to get to, and my child is asking me to, engage in this entire routine because, he's anxious before he gets to school, and we got to do things just a certain way, and you skip that step, Mom, and we got to go back. Or I don't want to go, I want to, watch YouTube for 5 more minutes, and, you didn't give me the 5-minute warning, we can't leave. And you're getting more and more escalated, and you are just getting really anxious because you got to get out the door. Your brain is like this as well, right? And the best way for us to be able to help regulate another person is for our brain to look like this. So think about where your child's brain is, and also think about where is your brain in that moment. Because sometimes, and we say this a lot in therapy, even for ourselves as therapists, when we're in the room and children are destroying the therapy room, is the first affect to regulate is your own, right? Because we're not immune to it as therapists either. But we have to regulate our own emotions first so that we can actually support our children. Because if not, we're just reactive. We're not thinking of being able to really think about what is the experience of this little person and what might they need from me. Because all I can think about is, I gotta get out the door. So oftentimes, what we do as parents, and I did it this morning, I do it all the time, is, okay, we gotta go, because if you don't do this, we're not gonna be able to do that, and then, as I get more and more reactive, it's like, okay, you either put on your shoes, or you're not watching TV at all today when you come back, and I'm using a lot of language. Or, let's say, if my daughter is crying, and I'm trying to fix it for her, because it's difficult to see your kids in distress. It's difficult to see your kids crying and feeling like, for example, my daughter told me that a whole bunch of her friends had run away from her at recess, and it made her really sad, and she feels like, you know, the kids are never going to want to play with her again. So again, I'm a child therapist, but here I am sort of seeing her crying and thinking like, okay, who do I need to call? And, you know, this is, and how do I give her the strategies to tell them that like this hurts her feelings? And my instinct, because I want to fix it for her, is to talk to her, right? And to say like, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? It's just instinct, right? It's not, it's in our biology to want to make things better for our kids. The thing is, when she's telling me the story, her brain is like this. She can't listen to my lovely strategies. She just literally cannot hear them, right? Instead, what I need to do and remind myself to do is, my first job is to help her calm down. I'm not going to calm her down by giving her strategies. I'm going to calm her down by being with her, by holding her, and by validating her feelings. That must have been terrible. That must have made you feel so sad. You look sad right now, right? Naming those feelings. My other instinct is also to say, well, maybe they were playing tag. Maybe they weren't running away from you, right? Like trying to present all these more benevolent scenarios. It's like, no, they were running away from me. It's like, okay, so again, being able to think about alternative options, like maybe she misinterpreted, that's something that we do when our brain is like this, right? I don't know about you, but when my brain is like this and other people are offering me like, well, have you thought about it this way? And maybe you're overreacting. That's not helping me calm down, right? That's just making me more like this and feeling like you don't understand what I'm trying to tell you. What I want is for someone to be with me, right? And so as parents, that can be a really difficult thing to do when your child is crying, right? So all you want to do is reflect, right? Reflect back to them what's going on, connect, and then redirect. Only redirect when you know your child's brain is here. And that might not happen in that same conversation. That might need to happen an hour later or 2 hours later. Because depending on like how big the emotion was, little people get tired after like emoting, right? Sometimes even with younger kids need to take a nap so that they can recover. And then when they've been in this state, in wizard brain for a while, then you can talk about strategies or options, or let's think together about what we could do differently. And can you go back for one? No, totally fine. And then the other thing is acknowledging their feelings even if you don't agree with them. Even if for you, the darkness doesn't carry the same kind of fear that it does for the little kid, it's okay. You're not gonna increase anxiety by saying, yeah, the darkness can feel really scary. You can even say, when I was younger, I used to be scared of the dark too. To know that they're not alone in that fear can be really helpful in normalizing for them. Because sometimes part of our anxiety is feeling like we're the only ones that have ever experienced this in the whole world and no one's ever going to get it. And knowing that my big person also went through it and they got through it, that can also be really helpful. So even if you don't agree with your feelings, you want to sort of name it for them because you're actually giving them that emotional vocabulary that makes sense of what they're feeling in their body. So that being said, you don't need to get this perfectly all the time. You don't need to remember to reflect, connect, and then redirect all the time, right? I mean, that's a tall order for anyone, and I know I didn't do it this morning. But that also promotes resilience, right? Actually, research shows that you only need to get it right 30% of the time. Right? And usually I see reactions like that of like, oh, okay, like, okay, I'm good. Like, it's like relief, right? I only need to get it right 30% of the time. I don't need to be perfectly attuned to my child all the time. Because if anything, that's anxiety provoking. If you're like trying to figure out every single sign and like this shifted and what does that mean, like you're not in the moment, you're getting anxious yourself. Your child doesn't need you to be perfect either. You just need to get it right 30% of the time. The times when you don't get it right, what promotes resilience is being able to repair, to come back and say, give another example from my daughter. So, you know, we were at a nature center this weekend, and she was, you know, being, you know, a 4-year-old, and she like throws her sunglasses on the floor and just kind of looks at me and walks away. It's like, okay, I'm gonna give her the benefit of the doubt. Please, you know, pick it up. And then she picks it up. It's like, oh, they fell out of my hand. Okay. And then, like, you know, we're walking another 2 minutes, and then she throws them down again on the floor, and then I get really upset. That was on purpose. You pick it up right now. And I was clearly using sort of a louder tone than the one that I'm using right now. And we don't throw our stuff to the floor. We're very lucky to be able to afford things like this, and, you know, just pick it up. So she picks it up and keeps walking. She's kind of giving me the side eye. And then she says, Mama, you yelled at me. It's like, yes, I did, because I was very upset. That was not appropriate. That was not okay. Mama, you hurt my feelings. And what I wanted to say was, yes, but I had to yell at you so that you could learn the lesson. And yet what I'm trying to teach her is, even when we hurt each other's feelings by accident, we still need to say that we're sorry. Right? Because that's what we want them to learn, right? If they hurt someone else, we expect them to say that they're sorry, even if it was by accident. So we need to model that for them. So even though I'm like, oh, I feel like this is a learning opportunity for her about taking care of her things, it's like, okay, I gotta prioritize this other lesson, which is, yes, I got upset, and I raised my voice, and I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry. And she comes over to me, pats me on the arm, it's like, it's okay, you'll do better next time. So that's the repair, right? Is there like a part of me, because of the way that I was raised, there's like a tiny little part of me in the back of my brain that's like, if I apologize, am I gonna lose authority? And I have to say, like, that hasn't happened. If anything, I feel like I still need to contain her. That's still my role as a parent, but I'm teaching her that important relationships and healthy relationships are marked by moments where we disagree, and yet we still can repair. That it's important to come back to the table and say, you know what, it was an accident, or I feel like I was totally entitled to do it, but I shouldn't have done it, and I'm sorry about that. And the reason why I'm telling you this is about that 30% of the time, right? 30% of the time you get it right, the other times you don't need to worry about it, because you know what? Not all stress is bad, right? We often think about, we want to shield our kids from all kinds of stress, and we don't need to. It promotes resilience for you to not get it right all the time. Because they also need to know that people are human, and not everyone is there for them all the time. They need to wait to get their needs met. Those are all good things, social and emotional skills for them to know. So I liken it to a little bit like making toast. Right? And I know that's a weird analogy, but so for some kids, a little bit of stress is okay and they can still function, and actually stress is where growth comes in, right? Being able to sort of get out of your comfort zone and try new things, that little, that's right amount of stress actually promotes growth. For other kids, they can take a little bit more stress, and they're still functioning fine, and they're thriving. They're the kids that maybe actually like to compete. They do well, they do better that way. And so each one of your children is a different slice of bread. And you will have to figure out how much do you need to toast that bread, right, before you burn it, right? Because no one wants burnt toast. No one wants to burn your kid's toast. Sometimes we do. Sometimes the only way that we know what's called their window of tolerance. Sometimes for us to know that my child has a window of tolerance that's this big, and I need to really support them, the only way to know that is sometimes you burn the toast by accident, and then it's like, okay, now I gotta, sort of walk it back a little bit. Other kids, you can get away with a lot more, and they're still fine. So just think about, and I think this is the hard part about parenting, is that every child is going to be different. And the things that work with one kid are not going to work with another, and one kid's window of tolerance is like this big, and another kid's window of tolerance is about this big. So think about, I need to toast this bread, but I don't want to burn it. And every kid is going to be different. So for that particular child, you want to figure out at what point do you burn the toast? And remember that discomfort is not the same thing as burning the toast. A little bit of discomfort leads to growth. If you are always in your comfortable place, you're just going to do things the way you've always done them. So there's no reason to change. There's no reason to try something new. If anything, if they get through that discomfort and they try something new, they are so proud of themselves. But as parents, our most common reaction when we see them in discomfort is to take away all obstacles, is to, sort of do away with whatever we think is causing them discomfort. So just think about discomfort and distress are two different things. Discomfort is, you're toasting the bread. Distress is, we burnt the bread. Okay? Sometimes we take away all of those obstacles because we feel uncomfortable with our child's distress. And our kids, in reality, can actually take a lot more than we give them credit for. So you want to be their cheerleader when they're trying something new, and you want to validate when things are hard, right? You don't want to say, like, here, let me do it. Or you don't want to say, like, you know what? I'm going to email the teacher and say, like, this was just too hard, or maybe we have to sort of back up. You can sit there with them, not do it with them, but be their cheerleader. And from the very early age, start to say, hard things are hard, right? They're not bad, they're just hard. And you can do hard things, right? And that you're not alone doing it. Right? I'm going to sit here, I'm going to think through with you, I'm going to walk this sort of journey with you. But I'm not going to do it for you. I'm not going to pick you up and walk it for you. But I'm going to sit here and encourage you and also tell you when you seem really proud. Because that's the other thing. When we do things for our kids, we're taking away that opportunity for them to feel proud. Because they know you did it, right? As opposed to them. But if anything, if we can help them walk through and think through things together and have sort of a regulation partner with them, when they do it, they know that was them. They had support, but that was them. And then, when we're thinking about what support to give, I always like to think of the acronym WAIT. Why am I talking? Most of the time, if I'm honest with myself, when I'm supporting my son or my daughter, I'm talking because I'm getting frustrated that they're not getting it, and like if they just move something just around, then like they'd get it right away and they wouldn't struggle, and if I know how to do this, why wouldn't I help them? That seems like very poor parenting on my part, to not just show them how to do it. That's my distress. That's my brain looking like this. Right? But again, if I can just sit on my hand, like, hold my hands in front of my mouth, do whatever it takes, and just keep thinking, wait, they figure it out. If anything, you could say like, that didn't work out. I wonder what else we could do, right? Like wonder with them. In a way, sort of teach them the process of problem solving without saying like, I wonder if maybe if we turn it around just like this, then it'll work. don't give them the option. They'll figure it out, right? What we need to do is reconceptualize our role as we're there as regulation partners. We're not there necessarily as problem solvers for them. And then when they do it, and they do the, it's like the best part of parenting, other than I love you, but I did it, right? To say, you look so proud of yourself. Because that also says that, and I know I do it too, but our most common thing to say is, I'm so proud of you. Right? There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But always couple it too with, you look so proud of yourself. Right? So that they can start to understand that feeling that they get, that pride, that was because they worked really hard. And they did it on their own. And they had support, but that was them. There's other things that you can do for them. Name and attain it, right? Name the feelings, even if you don't agree with them, to give them that emotional vocabulary. Right? Little people didn't grow up with like that internal sort of dictionary of what these feelings look like, feel like. They just know it feels like something in their body. They need their big people to tell them what. Like, I wonder if maybe you're nervous. And I remember telling my son, like, I think you're angry. He looks at me, he's like, I'm sad. But he was screaming. So to me, it felt like anger. So that's where you can say, like, I wonder if you're angry. Because we never truly know what's going on in the mind of someone else, right? So you can wonder with them about what they might be feeling. And then read books about feelings. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send Stacy a list of books that I like to use a lot with my own kids and in therapy. That's just a lot of feelings books, a lot of books around friendships, books around like, being able to do hard things that you can take a look and see. You might already have a lot of them in your own library, but you can use them if you feel like there's a particular area that you really would like your child to work on. And then you want to nurture their optimism, but just acknowledge the disappointment, right? Again, if we think about our own experience, if we're disappointed about something that didn't happen, if our partner comes up to us or our best friend comes up to us and says, like, but hey, look, it could be so much worse, this could have happened. We don't feel heard, right? So again, we need to do the same thing for our children, right? Treat our children the way we would want to be treated. And again, we, I think, often worry that if we feel like we're wallowing in the negativity if we acknowledge that. But if you jump to optimism too soon, the message that we're sending is, you can't talk about these things with me. Or, these feelings, these negative feelings that you're feeling, we don't talk about them, they're kind of dangerous, they overwhelm us, it's not good to stay there. But if anything, research shows that if you can join them in there, if anyone knows Brene, well, everyone knows Brene Brown, I think, at this point, but if you take a look at her videos on empathy, she talks about like getting into that hole with them, as opposed to like from above saying like, well, it could be worse, If you get down there with them and they feel seen, they're more likely to bounce back. And also model that you struggle with things too, right? That even big people struggle with hard things. I wish my life were a lot easier, it's not. And even the hard things, there are times when I wish they weren't hard, but they are hard. And so you can talk over dinner about the things that you had to do during your day that were hard, and how disappointed you were, and that once you were sort of calmer, how you thought it through. And discuss your problem-solving strategies, even with your little kids. Oftentimes, when there's conflict in the home, we sort of send the edict down about what's going to happen. And oftentimes, if you say to your kids, like, okay, you really want to watch TV while we're having dinner, I would really like to have a conversation with you over dinner. I want to hear about your day. What should we do? And you're teaching them collaborative problem solving. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to let my son and my daughter, just because they wanted to, watch dinner in front of the TV that night, that that's just going to happen because that's the option that they came up with. But you'd be surprised how often kids can actually come up with really great ideas. So in this particular scenario, my daughter said, like, well, maybe we can move the dining table in front of the TV. That way, you can talk to me and I can watch TV.
That's good problem solving.
Yeah, it's great. And before I said, like, kind of defeats the purpose, she said, like, no, that's not going to work out. The dining table's pretty heavy. How about we do a picnic? Why don't we do a picnic? You get to talk to me, and I don't sit at the dinner table. And we had a picnic in the playroom. Like, was it a hot mess? It was a hot mess. But I taught her that her ideas were valuable, and they weren't watching TV while eating. And what she wanted ultimately was to do something fun during dinner, as opposed to what I think is fun, which is to sit around the dinner table and talk. She didn't want to do that. Right? So ask them for their opinion. That collaborative problem solving can be really helpful for them, and it's going to be a really useful skill that they can use here at school. And then if you forget any of the strategies I've talked about today, right? Oh my God, and there's some pretty funny videos out there about like moms telling each other, like, remember, you're not supposed to say, I'm proud of you. You're supposed to say, you look proud of yourself. And like, oh my gosh, I just totally ruined it for life. I shouldn't add like another $5 to the therapy fund. Like, in the end, don't worry about the strategies. They're helpful. But in the end, what helps you support any child, let alone an anxious child, and promote resilience is how you make your child feel, right? So this is Maya Angelou saying, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that, when you connect with your child in a moment of distress, that is what they internalize. I'm sure my daughter is never going to remember those lovely pearls of wisdom that I gave her. What I hope that she walks away with is that sense of, when I am upset, people care about it. They don't try to talk me out of it. They just help me. Right? And as little people, and sometimes we worry that, like, okay, we're promoting, like, is there too much, is there such a thing as like too much attachment? Like, am I promoting this sense of like, they're never gonna be able to, they're gonna go off in college and I'm gonna have to like set up camp in the dorm room next door because they're never gonna be able to regulate on their own. That actually doesn't happen. If anything, what they're doing is they're internalizing that voice, your presence, that experience of you being there for them, they internalize it. And then when they're alone, when you're not there, they have you in there. They remember what that feeling was, and then they can do it for themselves. Instead of having to resort to avoidance because they don't know how to deal with it, or resorting to eating, drugs, risky behaviors, all of these things that people do because they are so uncomfortable inside themselves and they don't know what to do with it. That's where those behaviors come in. Right? What you're teaching them is what it feels like to regulate so that they can do it on their own, eventually. And so, I'm sorry, you do have a question, or? No, okay. So, ultimately, when would it be helpful to seek outside help? Okay. So, if you're feeling like your child is really struggling and you're feeling overwhelmed and it seems like, oh, the lovely strategies that I've given you today are not getting you anywhere, nothing seems to be working, and things seem to be getting worse, that would be a time to seek outside help. It could be support from the school, it could be an outside provider. If your child's anxiety is getting in the way of their functioning, if they are, let's say, refusing to socialize, if every day you're having to drag them out of the bed or drag them out of the school bus, or onto the school bus, I should say. If you ask them if they would like to talk to someone, and they say yes. And so oftentimes parents worry that, what does it mean that my child wants to see a therapist? First of all, I think a lot of parents feel like, okay, I failed as a parent, because clearly they wouldn't be struggling if I had done everything right. That's not true. Or, what does it mean that my child is trusting a complete stranger and they're not talking to me? And the thing is that kids don't want to worry their parents. And so they see you stressed out as well. They see that you worry about them. And so sometimes it's easier to talk to someone completely unrelated to the family, as opposed to feeling like they're burdening you. And the goal of therapy ultimately is to sort of transition the child back to being able to tell you everything that they're feeling. And for the therapist to also support you, to let them know that they're not a burden. Like these things, yes, I worry, but you know what, I'm still here. I can take it. It's also an extra set of eyes and ears on your child. Things that maybe your child may not feel comfortable bringing up just yet, that they might bring it up to the therapist. And it's a completely unbiased person in the family. So, if you would like to see us, check us out on the internet, you can also, if you need it, call your insurance to get list of providers. But other than that, well, thank you so much for having me here today, and I don't know if anyone has any questions.
If you do send your child to a therapist to talk to them, is the therapist allowed to talk to you about what they discussed, or is it still like documentation privilege?
So the question was, if a child goes to a therapist, can the therapist talk to the parent and talk about what's being worked on, or is there like a doctor-patient confidentiality, right? So, yes and no. So, a therapist won't disclose exactly what is being discussed in therapy, because oftentimes, in order for you to feel like you can say what you need to say without worrying that it's going to that you're going to lose control of the information in a way, they need to feel like the therapist is going to keep it in that room. That's not to say that a therapist, if a therapist ever becomes concerned about your child's safety, you will be the first person that a therapist will call. Family therapy is also really important. Like, I know that when I'm with a patient and something is being brought up that I really think that a parent should be aware of, or that this is exactly what we need to talk about, I am working towards helping that child say it to their parents directly in family therapy. Because I might also misrepresent what it is that they're trying to say if I speak for them. And if anything, I'm also trying to help this child speak, say the things that are going on for them. So yes, a therapist will tell you, and you also will know exactly what is being worked on, right? Like, what are the treatment goals? You will have a say in what's being worked on too, right? You might have treatment goals of your own that you would really like to include in therapy. But in terms of like the minute details, or the argument that maybe they had with a peer, or that maybe they didn't do their homework and maybe they lied to you about it and they feel awful, a therapist won't disclose that kind of thing to you. Not because of patient-doctor confidentiality, but because we need to make sure that kids feel comfortable to be able to say what it is that they need to say without feeling like the information is just going to be disseminated. But safety issues, you would be the first phone call. Any other questions? Yes.
We know that avoidance is the #1 defense against anxiety for kids. There's a lot of research
So the question, I don't know if everyone in the back heard, so there's a lot of research coming out of Yale talking about how the primary defense against anxiety is avoidance. And as parents, again, we often unwittingly sort of contribute to the avoidance, right? Because if our child says like, you know, I don't feel well, I don't want to do this right now, we say like, okay, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Or like we see them in a lot of distress. And then we sort of contribute to that avoidance. That is the most common way in which anxiety is managed, even with us, right? We don't, I mean, not a lot of us actually sort of openly go into something that's making us anxious, you know, day in and day out. Now, the problem with avoidance and the problem with sort of allowing it for it to go for too long is that it becomes a vicious cycle. I'm anxious about something, I want to avoid it, I've avoided it, and now that anxiety has gone down, so now I've learned that avoidance actually makes me feel better. But then that means that they stop doing the things that maybe developmentally they should be doing, like socializing with peers, trying new things, exploring, going to school. There's a tremendous amount of school avoidance since COVID. And so what's a parent to do, right? One is, if it's been going on for a long time, that avoidance has already been reinforced for a while, you might need additional support to be able to sort of break out of that cycle. Because when you have been, again, because you're trying to protect your child and it's uncomfortable to see your child in distress, if you've gotten into this dynamic where the child is used to the avoidance being supported, they're going to protest and protest loudly when you say, we got to change something here. And so you're going to need that support in being able to change that dynamic. If it's something that's just starting out, or it's something that's not really impacting their functioning too badly, like for example, you've got a slow to warm child, and every time that you go to a new place, or even a birthday party with peers that they know, but it's just a lot, they're hiding behind you. Or they're in the car saying like, I have a tummy ache, I don't want to go. Think about what's called like chunking. Helping them think about things in sort of smaller units that might feel more manageable for them, right? Okay, you have a tummy ache right now. I wonder if it's because we're in a new place, and you know, that sometimes happens. I know I get a tummy ache when I'm nervous about something. And some kids will say, yeah, absolutely, and other kids will say, no, I have a tummy ache. I ate too many hot dogs last night. Okay, well, let's try it out. Let's just go inside. You don't need to leave my side, but let's just go inside. 5 minutes. Does that feel manageable? And then you take that first step. And after 5 minutes, and say like, hey, you know, there's, maybe you find their best friend. There's, you know, so-and-so over there. How would it feel to maybe go over and say hi? And then slowly they start to separate from you, right? You don't allow them to avoid, but you support them, you scaffold, right, the interaction until they can slowly do it. And that happens a lot with kids that are sort of slow to warm, or kids that maybe have more sensory sensitivities where like new things just overwhelm them, right? You don't say like, okay, well, you know, you're going to the birthday party, here you go, and walk away. But you don't want to, you want to scaffold, but you don't want to sort of overdo it. And again, it's like burning that toast. How much they'll need from you will really depend on that child. But err on the side of doing less than doing more. Does that? Okay. Any other questions?
Just the child not feeling comfortable telling the parent about, you know, whatever, so using a therapist. mean, what other, I mean, I would feel a little bit like I made them feel that way, you know. That would be, you know, what did I do to do that? I mean, what other things do you see? I mean, I guess I have two questions. What other reasons, you know, I guess they're embarrassed or whatever, and, you know, how often is it just like something the parent didn't make them feel comfortable with versus some other reason?
So the question was, what are maybe some other reasons why a child might feel more comfortable telling a therapist? So, you know, are they embarrassed, or could it be that the parent made them feel a certain way in the past, and maybe that's why they don't want to share? Like, what are some of the things that I see?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of it is just developmentally appropriate, right?
Yeah.
If we think back to us growing up and slowly separating from our parents and sort of telling them less and less, that's just sort of a psychological task of childhood. They start to separate. Doesn't mean that they don't necessarily want someone to talk to about it. It just means that for that moment, it's actually sort of developmentally appropriate for them to maybe get that information from a peer. Sometimes we know peers are not the best sources of information, and so sometimes a therapist might be a really great person to talk to, as opposed to saying like, okay, we gotta go fight them when there's a conflict. A therapist is gonna say something different, hopefully. In the cases where children are saying, like, I don't want to tell, you know, my parents or my grandparents or whoever it is, because in the past, when I said something like this, they made me feel like it didn't matter, that I was overreacting. That's when, as a therapist, you start to work on two things. One is really sort of building up the child to say, like, you know, there is no parent, really, that wakes up in the morning and says, I really want to invalidate my child today. No parent does that. Do we do it all the time? Well, maybe not all the time, but do we do it a lot of the times when we feel like maybe they're overreacting, or we don't totally get what they're saying, or it doesn't seem like that big of a deal? Sure, like we've had it done to us, and we do it to other people unknowingly. But no one wakes up and says, like, this is what I want to do today. Children need to know that, right? The parents are doing the best that they can. And that for a lot of parents, it would actually be quite meaningful to hear, like, this thing that you did didn't make me feel so good. Most parents want, it's painful to hear it as a parent, but we want to know, because we don't want to make our kids feel that way. So I'm working with a child on sort of reframing it and thinking about how helpful it would be to have your parent know how to support you, because they're doing the best that they can. But goodness knows you didn't come with a user manual. But the other thing is, I do a lot of parent work, and a lot of clinicians do parent work. So what does that mean? Again, the way that we parent oftentimes has to do with the way that we were parented. Right? We didn't go to school to figure out how to parent. Like, no one taught us how to do that. The only way that we learned it was from our parents. And we decide whether we're going to parent in a diametrically opposed way, because we never want our kids to feel the way that our parents made us feel, or we decide, like, you know, this stuff was good, this stuff was bad, I'm going to do this stuff, and then once in a while I'll say something, I was like, oh my god, my mom just came out of my mouth. But parent work is really around, like, being able to talk about those interactions with your child that you wish would go differently, and trying to think about what was going on for you as a parent and why you reacted the way that you did. And how can we try something new? Because again, it doesn't make a ton of sense in child work to just work with a child. They're with us for 45 minutes. You are their most important people, right? And everyone comes to the therapy room because they want that relationship to improve. And we can't do that by keeping people separated. But it takes some time to sort of come back together. questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia.
And thank you for everyone's patience at the beginning with the technology issues.